All right, hi everyone, it's Judy May Murphy here. Today we're going to be talking about lack of support, not just from a point of view of it feeling really shitty when you're the only person who is doing anything, when you feel like you do everything for everyone else and no one does anything for you, but also from the point of view of how does this then extend out to affect your entire life, to affect your wealth building, your health, the relationships that you have, friendships, romantic relationships, family relationships. How does it affect everything? And how can we make sure that we're no longer living our lives trying to troubleshoot and put out fires in what I would call a narrative way? So the way that says, okay, so I'm not getting help with this project in the office and I helped that person last week and they're not helping me this week. When we're looking at it from that point of view of what's the story of today, already we're kind of like fighting a battle that is a battle, right? So what we want to do is we want to look at what are the causes further upstream. What is it that we have set up? How can we set things up differently so that we start to get a different result? So we've got 5 points today. I always think 5 points is good. It's things that you can remember, things that you can action, things that you can say to yourself, okay, the big one that I do or don't do is this one, so I've got something to focus on and something specific that I can do. And that's why I like to give it to you that way rather than just, sometimes it's rambling and all over the place, but hopefully we can pin it into some kind of actionable 20 minutes by doing it this way. So feeling unsupported. The first point is, why is it? Why is it that we feel so unsupported so much of the time? And this, as you know, this channel is for people who are identifying as being codependent or HSP, highly sensitive person, or complex PTSD, you had a really tough childhood that kind of set your brain up a little bit differently. Whatever it is for you, the place where all these different types of ways of being meet for us in this channel is at the place of just feeling not powerful enough in the world. Feeling like everybody else is the grown-up and we're the kid, or, you know, we're the adult, but we are giving ourselves way less. And, you know, we are simultaneously too big and too small for our own lives. And that's what we're going to be sorting out here. So why is it that we ended up in these situations where we often feel unsupported? What does that look like? Well, if you trace it back to your childhood, how were you unsupported then? Was it simply that you would do something and a reasonable expectation when you're a kid and when you're older is that others would see the things that you were doing? Maybe it was that you set the table for dinner and you set the table for dinner every night and nothing was said, and then a sibling did it once and a huge fuss was made. Or perhaps you can relate to the idea of that you would paint a painting, or you would write something cute, a little note, a little kind of like a Mother's Day card or Father's Day card, and you would be unsupported in that. It would kind of be dismissed. It would just be like, oh yeah, very nice, nothing, go away. It would be the feeling that you would get. It might have been that your parents were just very, very busy. It might have been just that they were unaware. Or it might have been that they were NPD and they just didn't consider anything that you did worthy unless it was fully all about them. So for whatever reason, you got used to this idea of being unsupported. Perhaps it was that you had an alcoholic parent who didn't bring in money. Maybe it was, you can see there's just like loads and loads and loads of different ways that anyone can feel unsupported in this world when you're a kid. So, maybe you were getting beaten up and no one came to your rescue, so you stopped expecting a rescue. Maybe it started like even further back than that, where you were in your crib and you were crying and no one came. So it could be pre-verbal, it could be before you even were able to ask for something or recognize that you could verbalize a need. So that's why this is happening now. You just don't see it as your due. You're not asking for it because you didn't have it for so long. Let's imagine that you have someone who is growing up in the middle of Beverly Hills in LA, and they are, as a kid, they are, given really expensive gifts. They're given jewelry, they're given scooters, they're given, whatever you can give a kid that costs a fortune, right? They're given that. And then they maybe leave school, leave college, and they don't have a job, but still they have the expectation that other people are going to provide that. Well, they're going to ask for it, even though it might be outrageous. That, well, how can you expect someone just to give you something for nothing? Well, we've got the opposite of that going on. We are kind of like the opposite of entitled, where we just don't expect things that we ought to expect. We ought to expect some support. So the first step is we identify, why is it that we don't really expect support? Because if you did, you'd be asking for it enough, in enough different places, trying enough different ways to ask, that you would have hit on a winning formula by now. So the fact that you haven't yet hit on that winning formula until today is proof that it's not something that you really expected. It's something that you see in others. You expect to support others, but you don't expect to be supported in the same way until you feel utterly overwhelmed, drained, like you've just given too much. So point number 2 then is about defining support. What does support even look like? Because when you haven't known it, it's kind of hard to even look at, well, what would that be like? What would it look like? What would it physically be like? And the reason that we have to do that we have to define it, we've got to define it to ourselves first, communicate it to ourselves first, so that we can start to communicate it to others without it sounding like, I don't know, you're just never there for me, and kind of woolly, and presenting it to people in a way that is whiny, makes them feel defensive, isn't clear to them exactly what it is that they need. Because it could be that if we say something like, I just need you to be there more, that they'll be like, okay, I'm here. And you're like, no. But unless you define for yourself, okay, what I need for you to prepare the kids' lunches while I am getting them ready for bed, so that when I come downstairs at night or in the morning, that's one more thing I don't have to think about. So sit down and define for yourself, what does it look like in a very practical, concrete way? What does it look like to you to feel supported? If you need to be emotionally supported, what does that sound like? What words do you need to hear? We need to grow out of this assumption that people need to be able to guess. And if they don't just magically know, then it doesn't count, right? It does count. People want to be trained. The healthy people in your life, they want to be there for you, but they don't know that there's a problem because you haven't communicated it. So the A part of the second point is communicate to yourself. What would that look like? How cool would it be if someone said this and someone did this for you and this was done for you once in a while? Now, this doesn't guarantee that people are going to be able to provide this for you at all, or immediately, or in the way that you have envisaged it when you are communicating it. But as I say, when they're healthy, they will want to be in partnership with you to making this work. So you'll be able to, so please don't sort of say, well, I already asked, and they stop doing it. The reason they stop doing it is coming up in another point. But, for now, let's just realize that we've got to define it for ourselves. What does that look like? Communicate it to ourselves. Then we've got to communicate it to someone else. You've got to sit down with them and you've got to say, I realize, don't make them wrong, I realize that I haven't been good enough at communicating to you what it is that I need. I know that you want to help me in this. I know that we're in this together. Let's suppose you're in the office. You know what? I love working on this project with you. I find you so creative. I find you so dynamic, or whatever the truth is for you in that moment. And what I need from you, if you are willing to give this to me, is I need for you to sit down with me at the beginning of the day and listen to my ideas and acknowledge to me that you've heard my ideas, so that I don't feel like I'm just being ignored here, or I feel like I'm not being as much part of the project as I'd like to be. Right? So something very, very simple like that. And then they might turn around and they might say, well, you're not a creative part of this project. And then at least you're not sort of battling against things. You sort of said it like, oh, really? Okay. And you need to go and renegotiate with a boss, or you need to go and find a different way or place to work. So you always win. Even if it's a no, you always win, because you have more information about what you can expect from them. And supposing you go to someone and they are more on the narcissistic end of things. And so you say to them something like, I would really like for you to do this. And they just blow up in your face. So you say something quite reasonable like, I realized that the habit that we're in here as a family is that I always cook Christmas dinner, but I've done it for the last 20 years, and to be honest, I'd like someone else to take over this year. And if suddenly they're just sort of like, oh, well, I can't possibly be expected to, and, but you always like to do that, and you're the only one, you've got more free time than me, and I don't know how to do it, or whatever, but you just get this idea of, wow, that's a great big no. Then again, you are able to say, okay, you know what? I'm not cooking Christmas dinner this year. So you need to make your own arrangements. If you're not going to be cooking Christmas dinner and I'm not going to be cooking Christmas dinner, I guess I'm off to the Seychelles. I'll see you. See you in the new year, maybe, right? So again, every time you communicate something, you're getting some kind of feedback. And it might not be feedback that you can negotiate with, or it might not be feedback that from someone who can be in partnership with you. So that's what you got to realize is you're doing this for the sake of clarity. And then once you have your clarity, then you can progress on from there. And you can just, it's a process. All right, the next step then, step number 3 in our process is that, it is possible that you have been rejecting support. That people have just decided, well, no, that like, why would I? Because they just, they just don't do it. I get this a lot with women who I coach who say, my husband doesn't support me with the kids. Okay, let's look at that. Because we go to the husband and we say, she would like more support with the kids. Do you feel that you are supportive? And they say, yes, I feel I'm really supportive. But anytime I try and do anything, she tells me I'm doing it wrong. So I try and, wash up after dinner, and she tells me, no, don't put the plates here, put them in like this, rinse them first. I'm not an idiot. If they come out of the dishwasher and they still got stuff on them, I'll deal with it. But, she then just takes it over again. That's a really, really typical one. Or, maybe if you feel that that's who you are, as someone who is the supportive one. So I remember when I was really, really young, so when I was like 11 years old, I had a baby brother. Still have him, he's great. And we had an au pair come in to help out this really large, chaotic, beyond chaotic household. And she tried to look after my little brother. So she would be doing something like putting on his coat and putting him in the pram to go for a walk. And I would freak out. At 11 years old, I was freaking out because why? Finally, I had some support. Finally, I had someone helping me with my younger siblings. Finally, I had someone who, would, distract other members of the house. I had someone who'd got my back, but you know what? I utterly rejected her. If she's listening, I'm so sorry. I was the worst to her. I just became vicious. And I'd never been that kind of kid before, but I felt like my entire identity was being stripped away. Like who I was, my reason that people kept me in the tribe was being stolen from me. So I didn't allow her to support me. So have a look at that. It could be that you are the one caring for an elderly parent and you've moved in and you've given up your job to be a full-time carer, and now you are sort of saying, my siblings don't help, or the state doesn't help. But have you rejected the help when it came just because it didn't show up in the format that you wanted, or most likely because that would have gotten in the way of your identity as dutiful son or daughter? Worth looking at, right? So what is the cost to you? Perhaps you haven't been seeing it, inviting it in, or even you've been rejecting it because the cost to your identity has been too high. You've been the helpful, capable, awesome person for so long that suddenly you don't want to be seen as in any way lazy or selfish or ungrateful or a burden or whatever it is. We all have our unique little spin that we put on these things, and you just don't want to be that. So have a little look at that. How is it that you could be rejecting the support? Okay, the next part then, part 4, is support within the system. We've got to remember that everything happens within a system. It's not just you over here doing your thing, people over here doing their thing. It's part of a whole. And as a whole, when you are over functioning in a system, naturally the other parts of the system will think, okay, that's taken care of, and they will start to underfunction. So let's imagine that you're a boss, okay? And you have 2 assistants. And you say to one of your assistants, okay, I really want you to take care of phoning up clients who haven't yet paid and getting that payment. And they say, yeah, absolutely, I'll do that. And then you turn to the other one, you say, hey, could you keep an eye on them and make sure that they do that? And in the process of keeping an eye on that other person and making sure they do that, they end up doing it a lot of the time. So they are over-functioning. So the other person's like, well, I don't have to do it so much. And then it then ends up with a situation where you've got one assistant who's doing a lot less and the other assistant who's doing a lot more, simply because the assistant that's doing a lot more started to over-function. So the other one was like, well, there's no need for me to do this. Right? So that's what you have to look out for. The fact when you over-function, people are kind of like, okay, well, she's got this or he's got this. And that can make you feel really unsupported, is simply because you are really over-functioning. You're doing too much. You're taking care of too much. Why should someone remember someone's birthday if they know that you're going to remind them? Why should someone clean the car if you're going to arrive home and it's going to be done on Saturday anyway? If you are one of these like highly efficient people who's kind of like, yeah, I've got that, it's cool. Other people, like you could have kids and you're like, why are my kids just lying around on the sofa all day? Well, maybe that's because there's nothing really that they need to do within the family system, that they've been sent this really big message that you've got it. And the price of them not having to do anything is just being moaned and nagged at a little bit. So the great thing you can do there is just stop. You just stop doing it. Stop over-functioning. If you are thinking that you're the one that phones all the time and the other person isn't phoning, stop phoning. It'll take them a while, but they will phone back if you're important to them. And then again, you have your answer. If they don't phone back, you're not that important to them. They only want you when it's easy. And what kind of wanting is that, right? So, just same thing for if let's imagine that you are over-functioning in the office. And there are things that you're doing and you know that that's not actually in your job spec, that's not actually in your remit. Just to be fair, let people know, hey, I'm not doing that anymore. But then just stop, just full stop. And it's not your problem, unless you're the boss, in which case, you use hiring and firing as your way of ultimately, hopefully it shouldn't get to that, but ultimately letting people know, either you do this or you have to go. But there's a lot of bosses I know who are more gentle and kind, and they're staying until midnight and their employees are leaving at 4 because, I just have to run this errand, right? So it's just not fair. My mom used to have that. My mom used to overwork, and her secretaries would go at like 3:30, 4 o'clock, and she'd pick up the slack thinking it was her being kind and being understanding, and that wasn't the case. It was that she was being a people pleaser. She was over-earning her place at the table, and it meant that she didn't have a really great functioning business. So as someone who is more sensitive, make sure that when you're the boss, you're really clear saying, I need you to stay later tonight. Is there extra pay? No, there's no extra pay. Just sometimes I'm going to need you to do that. Or, no, there's no extra pay because remember last week you came in late. That you can just draw these really, really great boundaries so that you make sure that other people are functioning and you're not picking up their slack. So have a look at the entire system. Where are other people being allowed to underfunction? How is it that they are allowed to not support you? How have you set this up by being overly supportive of them or of yourself, doing too much yourself? How have you set things up so that they can easily not support you and the system can still stay intact? All right, our last point then is staying out of resentment, because this is the big feeling that we feel as codependents, is we feel resentment. And that resentment comes from this overfunctioning that we just talked about. So looking at where are you feeling resentful is absolutely vital, because that lets you know that that's where the system's off. That lets you know where you are doing all those other things, not identifying, not communicating, overfunctioning, rejecting support. You're doing all those things because and that leads to your feeling resentful. That's what resentment is. All of these like signaling emotions like anger, grief, resentment, or grief is actually made up of anger and sadness, despair, like all these are signaling you that something's off. So what resentment tells you is, it tells you that you are not allowing yourself to be supported and you're doing too much. So listen to it. So anytime you feel yourself complaining about others, don't say, right, they now need to do this. No, you can't control what someone else does. You can just control what you do. So if it's in a situation with your employees, you're just like, right, well, what I can do is I can put them on warning. I can let them know this is final warning, or this is, your first warning. And after this, you're gonna have to buck up your ideas, or you're gonna be out. And then if they don't listen to that, you can just get rid of them, right? You can do that. And if you find yourself saying, oh, I couldn't possibly do that, well, look at your reasoning here. This idea that, this moral stance that there is one person in the world who is lower than everybody else. And that person is you in this case, right? Is that okay? Would you take anyone else on the planet and put them on smaller rations? Would you put them on a different moral scale where, everybody else gets treated really well, but they, even though they're a really good person, get treated badly? No, you wouldn't do that to anyone else. So stop doing it to you. And the key to it is when you feel resentment, again, just full stop. Full stop while you work out, okay, what's going on here? What would I prefer? So again, back to point number 2, or go right back to point number 1. Right, full stop. How is this like something in my childhood? Think around that for a little bit. Maybe journal around it. Chat to someone about it. Someone kind and who's on the same wavelength. Put it in the comments below. So this is a really interactive, as you can see, a really interactive, loving place. Put it somewhere where you can look at it and say, okay, I think it comes from here. Next thing then, you have a look at, right, so what is it that support would look like? How would it sound? How would it be? What would other people be doing? What would I be doing? And then communicate that to the person you've been feeling resentful around. All right? And then after that, watch out for, am I actually receiving it when they do try and support? And then, am I over-functioning? Am I over-functioning again? So sometimes, like if someone starts doing the thing, so supposing, I see this when I often get mothers who I coach to get their teenage kids to start making dinner. And then immediately this teenage kid starts to make dinner. They go, oh, honey, that's really good. Now, if you just do this and just do this and just do this, and they think they're being supportive, and they're not. They're not being supportive of themselves. They're not even being supportive of the kid who could learn how to make a really good dinner, could make their own mistakes. So there we go, 5 points for if you are feeling unsupported and how you can turn that around. And let's just look right at this basic idea of you deserve it. You deserve to feel supported. You deserve to, not be so alone in the world. Because then we start self-isolating. If we feel like, well, there's no point, there's no gain for us in being around other people, we start to self-isolate. We tell ourselves a story that we're being independent, and we're not. We're kind of being counter-dependent or overly, being overly independent isn't what we're going for anyway. We're going for interdependence. So this is how we start to build that really great, healthy interdependence. Okay, guys, well done for listening and for doing this great work with yourselves. And I will speak to you all very, very soon. Until then, take care. Bye now.